just to make sure that our custom rendering won't like freak out on certain hardware, which we've seen that it does on some.
What's the thing, the Amazon thing you're using to?
Oh yeah, we're using the AWS Device Farm. So they have like devices plugged in the cloud somewhere, and you can kind of access them and run tests and do manual testing and stuff like that. So basically, I just say, hey, these are the devices I want to test. Here's the build of the game that I want to test. Go run it. They do like a fuzz test, so it just like opens the game and then taps a bunch of times in random places, and that gives us a good idea of mostly whether or not it renders, but also how it behaves and whether or not there's anything weird going on, basically. And the first 1,000 device minutes are free.
So rendering-wise, were you writing custom shadow passes, or were you just telling the fragment shaders like be black?
So we went through a lot of different iterations for stuff like that, because first, basically, I was like, okay, Unity has shadows as a part of it. Let's just use that, and that got us. That works. That's fine. So it's basically saying no global illumination, which is like no ambient lighting, and then to get the crisp edges, which like up here, to get something like this, that's just turning off attenuation. So yeah, in the I think it was a surface shader at that point, basically saying if the attenuation is above some level, like if the light is above some level. So in like a normal rendering scheme, it would be like it's very bright here, is a value of 1, let's say, and a value of 0.5 here, and then a value of 0 here. So it would like fade as it goes out. I would say, okay, if it's ever above 0, set it to 1. So like even though it's right by the edge, it's just as bright here as it would be here. So that was fairly easy to do in surface shader land for Unity. The problem with that was that it ended up doing a bunch of extra passes to do all the shadow stuff, and we wanted to use Unity's static batching, which doesn't work for any shader that has for any multi-pass shader. So we had to do all of the shadow calculations in a single pass. I don't want to get too into it, but it's kind of really crazy. Basically, I just took out all the lights. There's no Unity lights in the scene at all, and every light is replaced by a camera which records a cube map of the depth of everything around, because that's how shadows are calculated. Basically, you can see the light is here, there's an object here, there's a shadow here. I'm creating a cube map from here that's saying the depth, aka the distance from this object to the light, is a very small amount, so that when I'm rendering this pixel, I can say, okay, the light is coming from here, is there something closer? Since there is, I know to render entirely black. So that's the way. I'm probably going to write a blog post on that goes much more in depth, because it's like kind of a crazy system at this point. But we took out all the Unity lights and put in these custom lights that do their own shadow mapping.
Cool. I should probably add that to the presentation too. I forgot the whole optimization process, where like the levels were all done, and then there was sort of a closeout. Remember that? We were like racing to get all the changes in. Jack was like, finish the music, finish the art. Because then what we had to do was take all those levels that were done and polished, and they all look great, and had animations and sound, and then duplicate those, and then they sort of went through the whole optimization thing where the lights were pulled out and changed and all that beautiful stuff. Which was because I was like, Jack, wait, it sounds like it's going to be hard to edit these levels after the change, which was true. So I was like, okay, we're just going to copy them. The downside is that anytime we want to make a change to one level, we'd like go back to the unoptimized one. So there's sort of like 2 games at this point. But it worked because obviously it runs really smooth, and let us know if there are any issues with that. But it's awesome. I still can't believe you did it. Like, it's crazy.
Sometimes me neither. Unity shaders, like there's just like no resources anywhere, and it sucks. So
You should definitely write.
you just gotta slog through it. That's my only real advice.
You could write 4 of those blog posts
Yeah,
and fill it up. Nick?
So this is kind of directed at whoever wants to answer it. What was the most frustrating part of the process? And if you had any advice for indie devs who might encounter the same frustration, what would it be to get through it?
Should we go down the line?
Sure.
Well,
I feel first. Okay. So the most frustrating probably would be the lack of documentation on shading. Shaders are just like really difficult to work with and annoying to debug because they happen on the GPU. There's not an easy way to kind of console log. What is this value at this time? That kind of thing. Aside from that, I would say have anybody heard of the 90-90 rule? It's like the first 90% of game development takes half the time, and the last 10% takes the other half the time.
Yeah.
That's really annoying. So it's like we got to the beginning of 2018 and we were like, we're gonna get it done for March. Maybe we'll get it done for May. No, it's gonna be July. Ooh, maybe August. Nope, it's September. Like that was a very frustrating period of time because you think, oh, we're so close. It's almost there, just a little bit more work. But the little things at the end that you kind of have to piece together, and it's like, oh, I just need to fix one little thing, and I need to fix one other little thing, and it's almost done. Those things take up so much time and are just, so it feels like you're treading water and you're not advancing the game and not improving it. And you are, but you're so close, and yet you're not. You feel like you're not moving, and that was the most frustrating for me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'll let you talk about the animation.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, I'll say a different one, which is this wasn't really like the most frustrating thing overall, but it was more of just like one very frustrating day, which was when we were going through the optimization process.
It was my fault too.
It's totally fine. But yeah, so basically, like we noticed that the game, we were like, holy crap, the game is like 1.5 gigs. Like, what the hell?
On the App Store when you went to download it.
Yeah, and to be fair to Frank, like all of us checked like on our computers and on our phones, and everything was like the audio folder is 1.4 gigs, which didn't quite make sense. But basically, long story short, I had like a really insane like 24 hours of just constantly trying to figure out why the audio was so big and it wasn't compressing down when we were building the game. And like Frank was constantly rebuilding the game because my laptop wouldn't do it for some reason, and it was just insane. And I also couldn't get my head around like how has nobody else had this issue? I was like,
we were just hitting up all of our contacts.
Yeah.
That wasn't after we launched. It was after we launched pre-order, right?
Oh, it might have been after we launched.
Yeah, it was before it went live.
It's
Yeah.
got this weird thing where it's like, well, we can't delay because people are pre-ordering.
Right.
But like, well, people weren't playing it yet, but like the clock was ticking down. It's like the satellite's it's orbiting Mars. And that was our time. So yeah.
But
It didn't turn out to actually be audio at all. It was my fault. My textures and my animations weren't as compressed as they should have been. And when I did that, we shaved off 900 megabytes. Whoops, LOL.
And then the sound was 200 megabytes the whole time.
Sound never changed.
Yeah, and just
really audio folder for some reason.
Sorry.
Why?
We don't know why it was
Yeah,
reading
the
it.
size was the uncompressed size. So I guess their compression settings are for when you actually build it, but the uncompressed. So we were looking at the uncompressed folder like, oh man, it's so big. Maybe that's why the game's so big.
But yeah, so just as a couple super quick lessons to take from it. One, check the editor log to make, which we didn't realize until like at the very end of this process, to make sure what's actually like building at the end. And then two, just so you guys know, yeah, the audio folder literally went from in building goes from 1.4 gigabytes down to 200 megabytes. So you should also check the size of your audio in the end and make sure that you have it properly optimized. And there's some like great articles online about that too.
I think it played in our favor too, because I saw a couple of articles that was like, oh, you might think that, $5 is a little bit much, but, the 1.5 gigabytes, like, it's a lot of material.
Like, oh yeah, it's gonna be a huge game.
Frank was like, all right, how do I make these files bigger?
Wow, a 30 gigabyte game. That's great.
It's a steal at $5.
Sorry about that. Most frustrating thing. That's a good question, by the way.
Yeah, I would say, we were talking about cutscenes. I think it was frustrating for two different reasons. First one is like it was just like the thing that we worked at the end, and what people were saying, like it's just we're so close, we're done with the whole sound and music for the game, and it's just a couple of cutscenes that we just have to do. And in our minds, I think because we both come from the film world. And it was going to be like this easy thing. It's like, oh, well, just scoring like a super short animation thing. But then we realized that they're not actually video files. The cutscenes happen like in the gameplay, right?
Real time.
So,
Yeah, real time.
exactly. So we've run into problems of like synchronization, because like at the beginning we just thought like we would have just one audio file running with everything, but Jack was saying like, what happens if something freezes and then the whole audio is out of sync, so it was just like a whole thing of like deciding how to type sound effects.
Yeah, and super quick, I'll also just throw in like anytime when you guys are working with sound, just keep in mind like anytime, and this is totally not us like ragging on Frank or Jack. No, but just like anytime there's like even like a small change in the length of the animation, like for anything in the game, like there were a lot of times like we'd go back through the game and be like, yeah, we like completed this level like 2 months ago, and we'd go back and like half the animations would be like a different length, and we were like, oh.
Yeah, Frank was like, oh, I'm gonna make this prettier,
Yeah.
but it was prettier and a little longer, so like there was a part of the animation.
So yeah, we had to like go in and redo all of
Remember
those
that
stuff.
wooden tree? It's now a metal box.
Yeah, exactly. That happened a lot. Yeah. So.
And that totally changes everything. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, the way I would answer it, the most frustrating part of the process actually might be right now in the phase we're in doing marketing and sales, mostly because I don't know what proactive things I can really do. So during development, there was always something to do. It's like design levels. Well, actually, Jack did most of that. More like, model some mountains, animate the dude, do some cutscenes, polish things, make animations. So when you have like 10 hours of work to do every day, you keep really busy and you think like, yes, I'm making the game right now, I'm working hard. But when the game's on the store and you're not really sure what you can tangibly do to drive sales, that's pretty frustrating. So there's a lot of stuff I'm doing every day, but I have no idea if it's working. For example, sent out a bunch of keys to journalists before the game had launched to sort of tell them like, yeah, definitely download it. Here's your promo code. Write a review. We'd love to have you try it out. Not everyone actually took the bait and actually did it. So maybe like out of 70 codes, we got like 15 articles, I guess. So that's frustrating. And then I wasn't sure if those articles actually drove sales at all, because I don't know if people are reading these websites. So it's frustrating. I prefer to have something hands-on that I can do that actually gets people to buy the game. But at this point, it's out of my hands. I can't control people. It's up to them if they find it and if they buy it. So that's pretty frustrating. I'm hoping that what helps is that when we're on Android and the Amazon App Store will be all over the mobile market, and hopefully then people can really share it around. I'm not sure if right now there's a ton of Android users and they're just like, oh, okay, I'll tell my friends about it once I buy it and play it. Maybe that's what's happening now, I'm not sure. But seeing the kind of the long dwindling tail of App Store sales, that's pretty demoralizing. So we just got to find out what I can really do to actually drive sales, not just busy work, but something that's like, okay, this is going to be great distribution. And maybe that means getting back on Apple's feature. There are more things we can do to actually make that happen, but you also just have to wait sometimes. Like, they'll bring it back, or will they? So yeah, it's pretty frustrating. But good question.
One back there.
Yes, I remember you from the alumni panel.
Hello.
Thanks for coming.
Hi.
Sorry to like totally put you on the spot.
I brought the autistic one with me.
All right, that's awesome. Good to meet you both. What's up? What's your question?
My question is while you're making the game, with all the setbacks that you had, with all the stuff that you had to readjust, and with all the stuff like, okay, like, there probably were disagreements, like, oh, I really want to keep this, but it's also a little, like, that's the whole thing. How did you try to find compromises in the group to make the game work?
This is a great question. We didn't do a good job.
It's mostly like Frank and I disagreeing on something, and then me offering a halfway solution, and then we're just disagreeing again because he won't move, and then another halfway solution until I'm agreeing with whatever his original estimate was.
It just gets worse.
So I figured out there is actually a way you can mitigate this. I didn't take it seriously when I got this advice from a project management guy back at Stevens. So I was doing some summer research project, and we had this guy come in who had worked at like NASA and also Microsoft. And for some reason, I didn't take his advice. But he said, he was a project manager, this is like his full-time thing, and he said, you've got to keep a log of decisions you make throughout the project with your reasoning, and also like who agreed to it and all that stuff. And you should basically keep a log of that. And I was like, boring. We didn't actually use it over the summer, and I just totally forgot about that. What I then realized as we went on, I mean, we've been working together 4 years. We've just been working together a year. But like, it's a lot of time that you have like lots of back and forth conversations over Google Hangouts, whether you're chatting or texting or like talking virtually or meeting face to face. You make a ton of decisions, but human memory is flawed. So there were sometimes Jack would be like, you said we were gonna do this thing. And I'd be like, I genuinely don't remember saying that, and I don't know why I would, right? But I probably did. The issue is, we never actually wrote down like, here's the decision, on May 9th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we said we would do this thing, and here's why we said it. So it's really important to do that. I mean, I guess it could help you fix bugs and stuff, like, oh, we found a bug at this time. But it's really more for like, determining these big things. If you are butting heads about something, you should find a time to actually talk it through and then write that decision down. We never really did that, so we were kind of just at the mercy of like, what did people remember? What email logs do we have? Maybe we put it as a task in Asana or GitHub, but then once that gets closed, you don't have a record of it anymore unless you go back and look at it. So we like look back at old comments. Yeah, so I don't think we did it. I mean, we made it, but we definitely butted heads a lot, and I think maybe that would have helped, the raid log, but I just thought of it like a few months ago. Because it came back in my mind. I was like, geez, yeah, and could you imagine working on like a much larger team? Oh my God, it'd be crazy.
Yeah,
it would be insane.
I can only imagine.
I think one other thing that, at least in my own personal mindset, kind of helps to make decisions in general and to come to agreements with other people is to kind of think from a game-first perspective. Like the most important thing with any interaction is that whatever the result is, it's good for the game. Like, if we're arguing about price and it's like, oh, it shouldn't be about what's going to sell the most, because that would be if it's free, and it's not what's going to make us the most money, because that's maybe it's $1 million and then we get one sale and we made it. But it's about what's best for the game, and kind of trying to be very honest with yourself and transparent about what that means and why you're making decisions toward that.
There is another piece of advice I could give, which is do as much testing with strangers as you can, because maybe a lot of your disagreements will be resolved through that. Like, if you're at IndieCade and you're there for just like a 2-hour slot, but you keep getting the same feedback, you're beyond the point where your opinions really matter, because there's people telling you like, oh, I don't know how this thing works, or I don't like this puzzle. So then you realize like, listen, doesn't matter what I think, what you think, what you guys think. We have a whole fan base that is telling us something. We should really listen to them, because that's our job as game designers. So that's another strategy. And what we tried to show with this presentation is that you don't have to wait until the game is nearly complete to begin testing. We even showed some of the throwaway stuff at like a C2GS event. Seriously, like February of 2015, you had sent me some builds, and I was like, I'm gonna go to C2GS and just play this with like Adam, if he's in there, and like the Bryans, and just get their feedback. And so, yeah, you know, get feedback as early as possible. That may help resolve some disputes, but you gotta write down people's feedback. So that's another thing. Don't save it for memory, because then you might come home for the event and it's like, I think people really like the pink. It's like, no, the green. I saw someone wearing green, so he liked it. You've got to write that stuff down. Yeah. Great question. Yes.
I just got a question. So how do you decide if you need to like, or how do you decide to add people to the team? And then when you do, how do you decide who to add and when?
That's another good question. I guess it was sort of as soon as the person was needed, and not before.
When we started, it was kind of like, oh, Jack will do all the design and programming, and Frank will do all the art and sound. And we did the demo. This is another good case for doing the 3 phases that we did. We did the demo, and Frank did all the sound for that, and we released it, and we were like, okay, this is fine. But Frank, you know, we talked afterwards, and Frank was like, hey, like, I did the sound, and it kind of, I don't feel like it didn't come together very well. I don't think that I should do the sound for the final game, and that's when we kind of said, okay, we're going to have to figure out what we want to do for sound. Are we going to have you do it, or are we going to bring somebody else in? I know I couldn't do it, so like that was where we kind of said, okay, we need somebody for sound. Let's start asking around, seeing if anybody might be interested, and then we met these guys at Play NYC last year, which was sweet. But yeah, I mean, it pretty much is, at least for us, just when we need the new team member to do whatever it is that needs to be done. We're both very invested in the kind of small indie team mentality. Like, we don't want to have a bunch of obligations to a bunch of team members in a bunch of different places for a bunch of stuff that they're doing that they deserve to be reimbursed for, or whatever it is. We kind of want to keep it like it's really just the 2 of us, and then obviously we need sound people. So now it's really just the 4 of us, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And while you're at SGDC, you'll have the luxury of working with a whole bunch of different teams. But I think you'll notice an issue that happens, like, let's say 4 people meet at a game jam and they're really passionate about just like working together because they're all friends. I think the issue you're going to run into pretty quickly is you got 4 people that really love the game and are excited about it. Damn it, every time. But they don't necessarily all have skills to contribute. And so you have like maybe 2 people who aren't really doing much. Or I mean, I've seen some groups where it's like 4 people in the group, 3 people aren't really working, or they're like doodling, and someone's like making the game. So that's going to happen a bunch to you at SGDC, and that's totally fine because that's what college clubs are for. But I wanted to avoid that, and I think the way we did this was perfect because Jack brought me in when he definitely needed an artist. We brought Caroline in because I didn't want to make a website, and I really don't have the skill for it. I don't know if you ever did websites.
Yeah, I just like didn't have time.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It's like, even if Jack could have made a website, that would have taken a lot of time away from making the game itself. So why not just get someone who can spin this up, and we'll say, okay, fine, you're in. So it's really about who complements your skills, who makes up for your deficiencies, and when do you actually need them? Because if we had started hiring a sound designer back when you started, or back when we did like the demo, it would have been too early, right? We would have been paying too much. Like, we would have had a really, really great demo, but like, what does it matter? So I recorded the sounds with my mouth and a microphone, like, ooh, wind. Right? It's fine. It doesn't really matter because who's playing with the headphones anyway for a demo? But when we said, okay, we're actually making this full game, we want it to really go far, we want every aspect of this to be perfect, then it was time to actually contract out sound and really have like superb audio quality. So yeah, it's as needed. Another good question. Yes?
I know you touched about the graphical problems with transferring it to either Switch or Steam, but
Sure.
what about advertising? Like, how are you going to go about that for the Steam and the Switch?
Oh, you mean, so if we finish the port?
Yeah, like if you actually port it, how are you going to go about like promoting it?
That's a great question. And honestly, that's one of the things that's maybe going to prevent us from doing it in the long run. Is just that if we did a Steam version, we'd put a lot of time into a computer port, but then I don't know how we'd actually advertise it. Now, one approach is to say there's a bunch of PC markets. You've got Grand Old Games, GOG, whatever that one is. GOG, Discord sells games, Steam sells games. Probably another one I'm thinking of. Oh, Humble Bundle, PC games, and itch.io. So one strategy is just like put it on all those and see if it gets noticed on maybe the smaller ones. We have a friend we met through developer circles who made a game called Zarbot. If you go and check like the Nindies page, he's probably up there. He got his game on Switch, and they actually put him in one of those Nintendo Direct things. You know when it's like, now let's check out our indies. And they show your game for like 6 seconds and that's it. He got in that. I'm really interested in talking to him and seeing what his sales are like because his promotion seems to be all through Nintendo pushing it, and he also got Playcrafting to host like a launch party for him, but I don't know if he's really doing all that much. So I want to see like, is Switch itself such a great platform that he's just going to do amazing? Or will he see what we had, where it's like, good launch weekend, cool, now the rest is up to you. So I don't know if we really have a plan in place for promotion yet. I don't know if you guys have any ideas, but that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? Yeah. Steam really doesn't promote your game as far as I know, unless you're like Tomb Raider or something. Like a really big game, obviously. If Civilization's on sale, yeah. Civ 6 or something. You also had a question.
Yeah. What's next in terms of game development? Have you already been thinking of new games to create, or are you just going to kind of wait for a bit, kind of fix up this game, try and look it for all it's worth, or make a sequel? So it's kind of going through your head so far.
We should probably go down the line. Yeah, this is another good down the line.
Yeah, like I like the idea of not having to work on something with all my spare time for the foreseeable future. Although I do have a tendency to spontaneously think of new game ideas that I like. Oh, this would be fun to do eventually, and then never do. So probably my plan is probably to continue working on Where Shadows Slumber until we get it, until we release hopefully in China and release maybe on Steam and Switch and Android and everything.
I have an idea.
Yeah. There it is.
A lot easier.
It's that easy.
It's all already written, just there.
It's that easy, everybody.
So I mean, I would probably like do that, but it's not going to be as much work as it was, this summer. Maybe work on a game that's less meant to be, commercially released and having a lot of people download it, and more to just like explore some new design space or something. And then maybe if Where Shadows Slumber does well enough, I would consider doing Where Shadows Slumber 2. But if the market's not there for it, I wouldn't. But I think I'm passionate enough about game design to always kind of have something on the burner in my spare time. So.
How about you guys?
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think we're obviously always available for Where Shadows Slumber improvements, and I think we definitely want to be like a big part of the marketing effort. But also, we'll be accepting more sound and music projects. I'm actually working right now on a book about how to write game music for Oxford, which is kind of cool. And we're
And if you have any new games that it's out, so let us know. But yeah, basically, just keep us into projects.
Yeah. I definitely still see Where Shadows Slumber as an active project. You were right to say it's not really done, right? So it's not really done until it's on all the platforms that we really want to get it out for. And then, I don't know, the prospect of starting a new game is so daunting, it's actually inhibited my game design mind. So I used to be like that, where it's like, oh, so many good ideas. I feel like I wrote them all down, and now I'm just like, oh man. Instead of thinking of how cool the idea is, I think it's going to take 4 years. Right? So now I'm thinking of my life in terms of time, and it's like, all right, so I die at 90. Let's work backwards. 90 divided by 4, but I'm 26 right now. And yeah, so I think I definitely want to focus on promoting Where Shadows Slumber, and there's really no game right now that I can think of, first of all, I don't want to take my time away from it, away from Where Shadows Slumber, so I should be focused on promotion. And so if I was doing another game, it would just be me screwing around in Unity because I'm bored, I want an outlet. Not so much that I'm like, all right, here's my next project, everybody. Yeah, so focusing more on promotion. Yeah. Yes.
This is definitely an audio question. So when you were going about I don't want to say producing, but recording the sound effect, this, specifically the ambient sound effects for the game, not necessarily BGM or something like that, but did you I want to know a little about the process of recording. Did you record in a studio, or was it mostly software based? And how did you go about deciding how to record the audio for the game?
Good question.
I'll take this
Well, I would say there are different ways of approaching it, and we did all of them. You want to record as much as possible, so your sounds are as unique as possible. You can always go to a sound database and download a bunch of stuff, but it's probably going to work very well, but it's not going to be unique. Whenever we had to do that, because there was no way that we could record, super crazy rain sound with a very specific kind of wind. We did that, but then we downloaded one, or we bought one, and then messed around with it to make it different, layered a bunch of different sounds, and I think that goes also what you were saying before. We wanted to design kind of like an alien world, so you can recognize the sounds that are happening, but are also there's something off or alien about them. For example, when we were thinking about in World Zero, where you're kind of walking around the forest, if you really think about how wet, dense grass sounds when you're walking on it, it really doesn't make any sound. So we were struggling with that, and I went to the studio one night, and I was like, dude, I got it. I know how to do the grass effect. I was like, oh yeah, I'm super excited. What do you got? And he pulls out a key food bag.
What? It's like a plastic
food, like a
grocery
supermarket
bag.
grocery bag.
Oh, okay.
And he starts hitting it, and I'm like, you're kidding, right? He's like, no, just let me do this. So he sits on the table and starts doing, and then just pitch shifting and layering, and just it worked. So that's what you hear in the game.
That's for the grass? The grass in the front? It's a plastic bag?
That's what we got paid for.
But I love stuff like that. I love stories like that.
Literally
It's
paid
never what
for
you expect.
No, sometimes you have to find creative solutions to stuff that just doesn't sound in the real world, so you just have to create it. And then I would say just mainly record as much as possible. If you can record, don't just put the sounds as you downloaded them, just mess around with them so they can be unique and kind of just
Yeah,
yours.
and for the ambiences too, it's cool because we could do a combined effect, because we were gonna have, all right, so we might have one basic ambient track, okay, this is gonna be the wind, but I was saying earlier with the effects machine that was constantly throwing sounds around in the different spatial domain. It was cool because we could be like, all right, well, let's say we're probably not going to go out to a desert and record some wind because, well, you know, this is just probably not going to happen right now. So we might grab some like desert wind from a library or something. But then what we did was we took like tons of sound effects, like some we recorded and some that we were just able to get like free or buy or whatever, and basically just used a ton of effects processing to make like super weird sounding animals. Like in World 4, we had like I think we ended up going with like bulls in the background and different flies buzzing and things like that, and we just like ran them through a ton of effects, like different delays and like distortions and whatever we could just to like mess them up until we found something cool. And so like I remember we did a bunch of, we would run things through these weird like delay plugins, and then we would record the delays, and then that would be like our new set of sound effects that we're working with, and then we would mess with those again and like do some more effects on those. So it's really just kind of like a process of messing things up until they're unique and really like portray what you want them to portray, I think.
So follow-up question real quick, if you don't mind. You mentioned a little bit that there was like, you wanted the game to feel unique, and there was kind of like, you had to keep the ambience in mind when making the sound effects. So was there like, when you were brought onto the team to make the sound effects, was there like an image and an ambience already in mind for the game with the sound effects? Was there some kind of like picture that you already had of how you wanted it to sound, or did you kind of like build on it as you went?
Yes, I think yes and no. I mean, like we definitely, like Alba and I talked about it. I mean, the first thing we did was sit down with these guys, and you know, they actually, I think that was maybe Frank or Jack's words of like, yeah, you know, like it's kind of like, it's reminiscent of Earth, but it's more alien, you know? So it's like, we want you to feel like it could kind of be Earth, but maybe like a billion years ago or a billion years in the future after everything died and like regenerated and turned into something. So, yeah, so basically, wait, what was the question?
Was there any aesthetic that we had previously?
Oh yeah, thank you. So I tend to do that. Yeah, so basically, Alba and I discussed it, and we were like, all right, so we're not going to do this. It's not going to be like a fully acoustic score. We're going to definitely use synths. We want to be able to like layer things, but we also want it to be very organic sounding. So we are going to use like acoustic sounding things. We're going to use some acoustic instruments and like the birds. I don't think you actually said how we did the birds, did you?
Oh no, yeah. Well, when I was talking before about how like we made some sound effects musical and vice versa. For example, this was also World 0. We have birds in the forest, and those birds are actually not birds. They're just musical instruments used to sound like birds. Like, so you have cellos in there. Yeah. So stuff like that just makes it unique, because you can definitely recognize birds, but it's just like there's something musical about it. It just blends together very well with the score. And following with what you were saying, like there are also like pure logical aspects to it. Like it's a puzzle game. Some people can take just 30 seconds to solve it, but some people can get stuck in there for 5 minutes. So you're gonna make a score that has like a very recognizable theme, because if that theme sounds like 20,000 times, you're gonna end up fed up with the game. So there are like those decisions that you have to also like implement and see if they work, and sometimes you just have to go back and say, remove some layers or something. So
Yeah, we want it very clearly. We want it to be immersive rather than like stimulating, I would say. I mean, obviously we want it to be stimulating too, but part of the stimulation is the immersion in the world itself. So that's why we had to like keep it subtle and as opposed to like Super Smash Brothers.
Right. And like Alba said, avoid the stereotype of the looping game music, which I love, and there's like some great looping tracks out there, but that was a big one, which is, since I know people could be in the game for 10 minutes, try to soften the blow there and make sure it's not a recognizable loop. I think you guys did a great job. It's awesome. I saw your hand was up for a second.
Yeah, I was going to say, in terms of making a game unique, do you think that comes from the gameplay, from the assets, or a mixture of both? And like, how do you guys think you did on that front?
I think that can come from anywhere. For us specifically, I think it comes from the mechanic itself, like the design. Not to say that it also doesn't also come from a lot of the assets themselves, but like the whole idea of the shadow moving over things and changing. That's our hook, as Frank put it earlier, and that's kind of what differentiates us from other games and makes us unique in that way. I do think that there are games where the core premise is similar to other games with a similar core premise, but the uniqueness comes from the setting or the score or any factor really.
Yeah, just in reading the reviews that some critics have written, they'll say, well, it looks a lot like Monument Valley, maybe too much, but I've never seen a game where shadows are used in the puzzles. So that kind of answers the question there. I mean, maybe I went too much with the Monument Valley aesthetic, but it's really beautiful, and like, what else are you going to do, right? But I mean, the only game people compared it to mechanically, other than Monument Valley for puzzle stuff, was a game called Hellsing's Fire, which I've never heard of.
Yeah, you know, you'd think we would have heard of that by the time
no
we
one
got to this
mentioned it.
point.
No one mentioned it.
Nobody's ever mentioned it in like when we've been bringing it to shows and conventions and stuff, and then like 5 different reviews have said like it's just like it's very similar to Hellsing's Fire, and it's like this game that I've never heard of that everyone suddenly is comparing it to.
Right.
It's probably good we never heard of it.
Yeah.
I saw a video of it too. Hellsing's Fire is pretty different. It's like kind of like
It does use light
Yeah.
in like an interesting way. So it's like you have to try to get there's like a bunch of enemies and they're stationary, and so you have to stand in a position where all of the red enemies are in light and all the blue enemies are not in light. And then you have to find a position where all the blue enemies, so you have to like do it in like a certain order or something like that. So it uses like, oh, here's a wall and you have to stand next to it so that the shadow is in the right spot.
casting the shadows. Yeah, that does make sense. That makes sense. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I exaggerated a lot when I was showcasing the game and trying to get people interested in it, but I never felt bad about saying that I had never seen a game that did this before, because I really had the idea of shadows cover something and then, you know, whatever's behind it could be totally different the next time you see it. I never saw that before. Maybe the closest thing was that Sherlock Holmes, but even that's like, that wasn't a mechanic. It's just a glitch.
Yeah.
You guys have seen that one, right? That old Sherlock Holmes game where they didn't want to animate Watson walking,
teleports.
so he just teleports
Yes.
and he's always behind you.
Yes.
Or like
It's so creepy.
the Slender Man game, I think did something similar where you can see him in the distance, turn around, and he's right there. Sure, okay, some first-person games have messed with, you know, oh, and you can't see the monster might be there, but this is pretty different. Yeah, right, that's not shadow, that's more like perspective and us. So I think
that
we're pretty
video was the inspiration for this. the first piece of the puzzle.
Was it really?
A little bit. Yeah.
That's awesome. But that wasn't a mechanic, that was just them being lazy. They didn't want to animate Watson. Animate Watson! That's the moral of tonight, yeah.
Alright, I got a question. How do you like design a puzzle level, I guess? Like how do you make sure people usually won't get stuck in, how do you like?
So it's really tough. Like we had a lot of issues with people learning, like teaching the player. One of I didn't listen earlier, I almost did. One of the more frustrating things that happened throughout our development process was like we brought the game to a show. And we had designed, we were like, okay, what should the first few levels look like? This is what they should look like so that people will kind of get an introduction to the mechanic. Bring it to a convention, a bunch of people play it. The feedback we get most often is, wow, I really liked it, but I didn't get it at first. You should add like tutorial levels. And we're like, okay, cool. So we come back next show, we're there. We got new levels, we got the same, we just got added level at the beginning, much easier, introduced you nicely to the mechanic. People, biggest feedback we get, you know, I really liked it, but I didn't get it at first. You should make more tutorial levels. That happened at least like 5 or 6 times. Where it's just always like, okay, we gave you like the simplest thing we could possibly give you, and people were like, I didn't get it. So we kind of started with wanting I have to go on a tangent at this point. We kind of started with wanting a textless game entirely, so we wouldn't have to do translation, but also it would be mysterious. But we ended up conceding a few points, and the first few levels we put text on that says like, this is like do this, like drag these glowing objects or whatever. But in terms of level design itself, it's mostly like, for me, it's kind of just like thinking about interesting interactions that you could do with this and trying to think. It's actually very interesting because in a lot of cases, like 1.5, if any of you got there, like the last level of the jail world, it's like because of the placement of pillars and the placement of breaks in bridges, it's like you can mathematically determine whether or not a level is solvable or is possible to get into a state where it's broken, etc. So it's just interesting to think about stuff like that. To kind of, I have a whole notebook. Actually, I have it here with me, but it's not interesting to look at. I have a whole notebook filled with just like me sketching out, like what would happen if I put a pillar here, and the goal is here, and there's a bridge here, and it's broken, and then and then I like kind of have a half of a sketch, and I like fill it in with spaces to like, oh, it would be a more interesting puzzle if there was another pillar here. Let me try that. Oh, let me put a dragon hole here, and kind of do that. And then that's when I would show it to Frank. We kind of go back and forth and say, it might be better if it did this, it might be better if it did that. Will the player understand this? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Then we build the gray boxing levels, which we never actually showed.
Oh, let me see if I
but
can.
it's basically, because the art is all kind of bespoke for each level, very custom made, but it's very easy for me to throw together a level and just like put the nodes down and go. All the code is already written. So it's very easy to spin up a level. So I would just make a level with whatever I had designed, and we would show it to people, bring it to shows, see what people think. If people like the design, don't like the design, what they like about it, what they don't like about it, stuff like that. So it's kind of a whole big process, but it mostly comes from thinking about just musing on what would be interesting ways to interact with these mechanics.
I actually have it here because I did a blog post that was just like taking one level all the way through this process. Actually, who asked this question? Yeah. So if you want to check on the blog for it later and read the full thing, it's one level, the first aqueduct level called Noria, from the time it was like notes in Jack's notebook to the time when it was a sketch where I was like sketching this out, to then Jack's gray box prototype, which then gets a first pass. So this is like art, but it's not great art. It doesn't look like something you'd pay money for. Yeah, you pay money for that. You pay money for that. No, but then that gets polished a little bit. So it's really a back and forth. It's like Jack's got the idea, and I've got to sketch it out. Because basically what I would do is say like, okay, Jack's given me this sort of layout, but I know this is in the mountain world. So would this be a pillar, or would this be like a rock? That kind of thing. And I basically try to make the puzzle make sense in some kind of a world, and then we go back to gray boxing, because Jack's like, okay, cool, this is good design, great. Here's the level working, but not pretty, but it works, and you can test it. And we actually took a bunch of these to AwesomeCon in Washington, D.C., a bunch of gray box levels. I gave the iPad to these people, and I was like, I'm sorry, these don't look pretty, but I need you to tell me if these puzzles suck. And that was a good chance to get feedback, because I just said, don't give me art feedback, I don't care, I know it looks terrible, but what do you think of these puzzles? And that was for like World 2 and 3, because we had enough gray boxes there at that point. And then once it passes that portion, then I feel good doing the actual artwork to make it look more like that. Because I didn't want to do a bunch of artwork on levels that weren't actually going to make it the full game. But yeah, I didn't actually design many of the puzzles. The ones I did were kind of bad. And I like tried to trick people mostly. So like if you play a level, we're like, ah, that was cheap. Why? That was funny. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Yeah, all of Frank's levels involved guessing or like trial and error. Like, oh, he accidentally figured that out.
Oh, but one thing we decided early on was that we didn't want the player to ever reach like a death state or get actually stuck. There is a reset button, and I'm sure there's probably some level out there where you can actually get stuck, and you have to reset. But as far as we're concerned, the player never actually dies or like steps on spikes or something. And also, you can never get in a position in the game where you're like trapped in a dead end, and it's like, ah, you lose, LOL, reset. That would be more of a glitch or just a logic flaw. There's one level, right, where you can get stuck, you think? Or someone found it?
Yeah, somebody found somebody found a way to get stuck, but the fact that they got there implies that they can get out of it. Like they could use the same method they got there to get out of it. If you're thinking of the same one.
They're not really stuck. Is that
Yeah.
the 5?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that person just didn't figure out the actual puzzle thing. Oh, but the ghost was in front of his.
Yeah.
He couldn't walk on the thing. Yeah.
But the fact that he got the ghost there would imply
Right.
that he can move the ghost away from there. So.
Right. So that was something we did, and that affected all of our puzzle design, because then you can't have like spikes, you can't have actual enemies, none of that stuff. But it made it more of like a Zen puzzle experience. That's sort of us taking more of the Monument Valley inspiration. So, yeah. Great questions. That's the most questions we've ever had.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Any others?
This is a visuals and art question. So, when you were deciding on like this like kind of off isometric thing,
Yeah.
first of all, is there a particular reason that you went with this? Like, it's definitely not exactly isometric. Is there a reason that you chose this kind of like angle?
You picked the angle, right? Well, we were messing around with stuff.
Yeah, so in terms of using this angle, we didn't want to do straight 90 or straight 90 the other way. So we wanted this kind of soft middle ground area, but we tried 45, and the problem with 45 was that, and we were working with the gray box levels at this time, so the art might have helped us out of this problem. But the big issue with the 45-degree angle was that it looked too much like we were trying to be Monument Valley, in that there were a lot of times where it would happen that two things would line up where they shouldn't have. And so it would make it seem like we were doing Monument Valley tricks with perspective and stuff, when we really weren't. And so then I was leaning toward like a 60-30, because I was like, all right, not 0, not 90, let's go in the middle, 45. All right, let's go kind of, instead of half, let's do 2/3 and 1/3. And it was 30 and 60. And that was almost right. It was like, it feels a little bit too much like we're in one direction, so we went down to like, I think it is 53 or 57. So it's kind of really just like a trial and error, finding the right mix of which angle we wanted to go with.
Yeah, and if you ever like go to Unity and put the camera in this mode, it's going to be hard for you not to accidentally make Monument Valley. Because really, like, they just line up perfectly, and you're like, oh, that's how they figured out to do that as a game. But it happened so many times that we just had to sort of, but we still needed to fix perspective, because it's still a perspective game. We needed to make sure that, the shadows would hit at just the right time, and you wouldn't be able to see that transition. That was frustrating too. I should have mentioned that. Like times when the shadow was supposed to cover up a bridge, but on its way back you could see the piece pop in, because maybe it's like, a little banister hanging off the water, and they're like, oh damn it, delete that banister. Like, yeah.
So follow-up question, since when you were actually designing the assets, like modeling things before actually implementing them, is keeping this one perspective that the player's always going to be viewing it from. Like, how did that change your design process when you're modeling stuff before actually implementing it?
It just kind of evolved over the course of the project. I did a ton of iteration, and that was actually why I pushed for the cutscenes being real time, which is stupid, right? You should just render out your cutscenes as a video and then have people watch a video. But I really relied on iterating and saving something from 3ds Max and going right into Unity and being able to load it up and play right there. So I did a lot of edit and play, like constantly going back and forth between 3ds Max and Unity, because when I'm in 3ds Max, I can move the camera all over the place, and you sort of lose a sense of scale. But if you put the model into the puzzle, that's why the gray box levels were perfect, right? Because Jack already had the level, and he was like, here are the things, they're not changing. So I would be able to, let's say I have to model a big tower that's going to cast a shadow. I know exactly how high it can be. If I make it too tall, I'll notice that, oops, we missed Obi. He went behind the pillar. We can't see him. So then I shrink it. So I was constantly going back and forth between the editor. And that's honestly how I did it. Other than the sketches, so the sketches help too. So if I would sketch out a level beforehand, I'd get a sense of, how tall these models could be, what they could block, what they couldn't block. Yeah, just tons of iteration. So that's something I would recommend for any of the artists here. Like, figure out your Unity pipeline, like from 3ds Max. Get that really good, because you definitely don't want a situation where it takes forever to get something out of your modeling system, and you say, oh Jesus, maybe I'll do that once a month. No. Like, you should be doing it like every few minutes, because that's what matters, right? It doesn't matter how beautiful it looks in the modeler. I want it to look good here at this specific angle. Yeah. So it's a weird answer, but it's tons of iteration. That's a short answer.
The other thing about this angle is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of these models, like here, don't have opposite sides. So if you had the camera on the other side of the scene, like if you had a camera pointing out this way, most of this you wouldn't be able to see. Like a lot of it, like this thing spins, so it has all its sides, and like some of the pieces are reused in a lot of places, so they have all their sides. But like a lot of the back sides of stuff we just don't have, because you will literally never see them, and we just don't need them. So it's like, why even bother making them?
That's where the modularity came in handy. Just having different pieces, like this is bridge L1, bridge corner 2. It was part of optimization. So Jack was like, Frank, there's too many polys. Like, can you get rid of some polys? And I didn't want to get rid of any art, but there was clearly, like, we knew we would never need some of those faces. So then I was able to go into my 3D modeling thing and duplicate a bunch of them and say, okay, here's the one at this particular angle that doesn't have these sides. Here's the other one when it's rotated. So that same piece, but rotated, now these sides are gone. Yeah, and that took a lot of iteration, because I'd have to see, like, when I'm playing the game, okay, do I notice the fact that I just deleted half of this thing? If I don't, good job. And it came out great. So that actually felt good, because I could see the polys going down. I was like, yes, optimizing. I'm optimized.
All right, I think we got time for like one more, unless
You guys have some good
We get time
questions.
for 0 more.
Actually, it looks like we're pretty much done. All right, well, thank you guys so much. It was
so much.
fantastic.